I'm Carmel Whitney, 65 years old, with arthritic hands that somehow managed to sew 30,000 stitches into my daughter Lillian's wedding dress. 6 months of love, in every thread. Then I heard her laugh with her bridesmaids. If she asks, tell her it doesn't fit. It looks like something from a thrift store. My heart shattered like glass. I silently took the dress and walked away. What happened next changed everything between us. Before I continue, where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more stories of family healing. My relationship with my daughter Lillian has always been complicated, like most mother-daughter relationships, I suppose. I spent 40 years as a professional seamstress before my retirement, creating everything from prom dresses to theater costumes. My little workshop behind our modest suburban home was my sanctuary, and when Lillian was just a child, it was hers too. She would sit for hours on a small stool I bought, just for her, watching my hands transform flat fabric into three-dimensional magic. Her eyes would widen with every finished piece, her small fingers reaching out to touch the sequins and lace with reverence. "Mommy," she'd say, her voice filled with awe. "Someday when I get married, will you make my dress?" I always smiled and promised her I would create the most beautiful wedding gown any bride had ever worn. As Lillian entered her teenage years, I taught her the basics of sewing. She learned to thread needles, create simple stitches, and eventually completed a summer dress that she wore proudly for months. But as high school progressed, her interest waned. Fabric and thread were replaced by makeup and smartphones. Our special time in the workshop became less frequent, then rare, then non-existent. Still, I kept my collection of wedding dress sketches in a special portfolio, adding to it whenever inspiration struck, always with Lillian in mind. When Lillian called us on a Sunday evening last year to announce her engagement, my heart soared. At 32, she had found love with James Harrington, a successful 38-year-old businessman who had swept her off her feet with his charm and ambitious nature. The moment she shared the news, my mind immediately went to the wedding dress I would finally create for her. "I was thinking about your dress," I said carefully during our first wedding planning lunch. "I've kept so many designs over the years." Lillian's hesitation was immediate and unmistakable. "Oh, Mom, I was actually looking at Vera Wang and Carolina Herrera collections. Professional designers, you know." My heart sank, but I wasn't giving up that easily. "Just look at my sketches before deciding," I pleaded, pulling out the portfolio I'd brought specifically for this moment. "This has been my dream too, Lily." As she flipped through the pages, I saw a glimmer of the little girl who once sat on that workshop stool. "This one's actually beautiful," she admitted, pointing to an elegant A-line design with delicate lace overlay. "But can you really make something this sophisticated?" I reminded her of the wedding gowns I'd created for clients through the years, the theater costumes that had been featured in local papers, and finally I saw her reluctance fade. "Okay," she said with a tentative smile. "Let's do it." The following weeks were filled with trips to exclusive fabric boutiques. Lillian insisted on only the finest materials, selecting an imported silk satin that cost more per yard than any fabric I'd ever worked with. The lace came from France, the seed pearls from Japan. I worried about the expense, but my husband Walter just smiled and said, "It's her wedding day, Carmel. Let's give her what she wants." Planning the dress became increasingly complicated, as Lillian's requests contradicted each other from one meeting to the next. "I want it simple and elegant," she'd say one day. A week later, "Actually, I'm thinking more princess style, with a fuller skirt." These changes often followed lunches or phone calls with her new friends, women connected to James's wealth and social standing. I began to notice how Lillian's manner changed when around these women. Her voice took on an affected tone, her gestures became more restrained, and she began criticizing things about our family home that had never bothered her before. "Mom, you really should update these kitchen cabinets. They're so dated," or "nobody wears costume jewelry anymore." The brooch she referred to had been my mother's. Despite these concerning changes, I felt a quiet joy when Lillian finally approved the final design. I took precise measurements and began the work that would consume the next 6 months of my life. What Lillian didn't see were the long nights when my hands cramped so badly I had to soak them in warm water before continuing. She didn't notice how I wrapped my fingers in support bandages each morning, or how I adjusted my sewing schedule around taking anti-inflammatory medication. Each of the 30,000 stitches was placed with precision and love. The beadwork alone took over a month. Tiny seed pearls and crystals attached in an intricate pattern across the bodice. The lace appliques on the train were positioned to create a flowing garden effect, each one hand-sewn and nearly invisible from the underside. Even as my arthritis flared painfully, I continued working, determined to create the masterpiece I had promised my daughter since she was small. Walter grew increasingly concerned. "Carmel, you're pushing yourself too hard," he'd say, bringing me tea late at night when he found me still hunched over the dress. "Lillian wouldn't want you to be in pain for this." "She's our only child, Walter," I'd reply. "This is my gift to her. I can rest after the wedding." The first fitting with the dress, half completed, filled me with hope. Lillian stood before the mirror in my workshop, the pins still visible along the seams, and for a moment I saw genuine emotion in her eyes. "It's starting to come together," she said quietly. Not effusive praise, but enough to keep me motivated through the increasingly difficult final stages of construction. I planned the final reveal, with all the joy and anticipation of giving a precious gift. In my mind, I imagined Lillian's face, lighting up perhaps tears of gratitude, and most importantly, I imagined this dress becoming a family heirloom that might someday be worn by a granddaughter. The culmination of my professional life would be this creation made with love for my only child. The first sign that something was wrong came when Lillian canceled 3 final fittings in a row. "Work's crazy," she texted. "James's mother is planning this huge engagement party. My bridesmaids want to do a spa weekend." Always an excuse, always last minute. During the engagement party at James's parents' lavish home, I overheard comments that made my stomach tighten. One of Lillian's new friends, a sleek woman with a designer handbag that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment, asked about the wedding dress. "Lillian says her mother is making it," another replied with raised eyebrows. "So, homemade." The way she said homemade made it sound like a communicable disease. Their laughter that followed was soft but unmistakable. That evening, I noticed Lillian quickly closing her laptop when I entered the room. I caught just a glimpse of what looked like a designer bridal website. "Just getting ideas for the bridesmaids," she explained too quickly. I chose to believe her. The Lillian, who had once proudly worn her handmade summer dress to school until it was threadbare, was disappearing before my eyes. In her place stood a woman who checked price tags before expressing admiration, who spoke about networking opportunities at the wedding, who seemed embarrassed when James's mother asked about her father's job as a high school science teacher. I tried to reconnect with the daughter I'd raised. I invited her for lunch at our favorite diner, suggested we visit the art museum as we used to on Sundays, even offered to teach her to make the butterscotch cookies she'd loved as a child. Each invitation was met with a distracted, "I'm just so busy with wedding stuff, Mom, maybe after the honeymoon." Family traditions that had once been important to her were suddenly negotiable. The blue handkerchief her grandmother had carried at her wedding was deemed too old-fashioned. The reading from her favorite childhood book was cut from the ceremony because it might seem unsophisticated. When the final fitting was finally scheduled for the day before the wedding, I was both nervous and excited. The dress was complete, a true labor of love, and my finest work. Walter helped me carefully transport it to the venue, an elegant hotel where the wedding party was staying. "You've outdone yourself, Carmel," he said as we drove, "but I'm worried about you. Your hands look worse than I've ever seen them." "It was worth it," I insisted, though my fingers were swollen and painful. "Wait until you see Lillian's face." Walter dropped me at the hotel entrance. "I'll park and wait in the lobby. Text me when you're done so I can help you bring the dress back if needed for any final touches." As I walked toward the bridal suite garment bag carefully draped over my arm, I rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain each special detail, the meaning behind certain design elements, the ways the dress honored our family history while embracing Lillian's future. I arrived a few minutes early and paused outside the door, hearing voices and laughter from within. My hand was raised to knock when I heard my daughter's voice crystal clear through the door. "If she asks, tell her it doesn't fit. It looks like something from a thrift store." My hand froze in midair. Surely I'd misheard. "I can't believe you actually let her make it," another voice said. "Isn't your mother like super old?" 65 and her hands are all twisted from arthritis. I felt too guilty to tell her no, but there's no way I'm wearing that thing tomorrow. Not when James's entire family will be watching. His cousin had a Dior gown at her wedding. "What will you do with it?" a third voice asked. "Donate it, I guess, or stick it in the attic. As long as I have pictures in the Carolina Herrera for my mother, she'll never know the difference." The physical pain that shot through me had nothing to do with arthritis. It felt as though someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it burst. 6 months of work, thousands of hours, physical pain endured willingly, all for a dress that would be hidden away unworn and unappreciated. I took 3 deep breaths, straightened my back, and knocked on the door. The sudden silence was deafening. When the door opened, 3 bridesmaids stared at me with identically horrified expressions. Behind them stood Lillian, her face draining of color. "Mom, you're early." "The traffic was lighter than expected," I said quietly, my voice surprisingly steady. I stepped into the room, still holding the garment bag. The bridesmaids looked everywhere, but at me, one suddenly fascinated by her manicure, another checking her phone with intense concentration, the third mumbling something about finding the wedding planner. Lillian's smile was brittle and false. "Is that the dress? We should probably do the final fitting." I unzipped the garment bag and revealed the gown that represented not just months of recent work, but decades of professional skill and a lifetime of maternal love. It was, objectively speaking, beautiful. The silk caught the light like liquid silver, the beadwork creating subtle patterns across the bodice, the lace at the hem telling a story of delicate flowering vines. "Actually," I said carefully, rezipping the bag, "I think we both know this fitting isn't necessary." Lillian's face fluctuated between embarrassment and defiance. "Mom, I can explain," she started, but I held up my hand to stop her. "There's nothing to explain. I heard everything." My voice remained calm despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. "I'll be taking the dress with me." "You can't just leave." Lillian's voice rose with panic. "What about tomorrow, the wedding?" "I'm sure you've already made arrangements," I replied, turning toward the door. "Your Carolina Herrera will be beautiful." The bridesmaids had the grace to look uncomfortable. One whispered, "I'll go check on the makeup schedule," and fled the room. The others quickly followed. Alone with my daughter, I waited for an apology, an explanation, anything that might soothe the raw wound of her betrayal. Instead, she offered excuses. "It's not that I don't appreciate all your work, Mom. It's just not what I pictured for my wedding. James's family has expectations. You understand, right?" I didn't answer, couldn't answer. The dress felt impossibly heavy in my arms. "You're still coming tomorrow, aren't you?" Lillian asked, her voice small. "I need to go. Your father is waiting." I left without looking back, my composure a thin veneer over the collapse I felt coming. Walter took one look at my face in the lobby and knew something was terribly wrong. He took the dress from my trembling hands and guided me to the car without questions. Only when we were on the highway did he speak. "What happened?" The tears came then, a flood that I couldn't control. Between sobs, I explained what I had overheard, how our daughter had mocked my work, how she had planned to deceive me all along. Walter's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. "I can't believe she would do that to you, after everything you put into that dress." At home, I carefully hung the dress in our spare bedroom and closed the door. I couldn't bear to look at it, but couldn't bring myself to put it away either. Then I crawled into bed emotionally and physically exhausted. The next morning, I discovered through Lillian's social media that the deception ran deeper than I'd imagined. There, posted 2 weeks earlier, but hidden from my view through privacy settings, was Lillian in a bridal salon beaming in an elegant designer gown. "Said yes to the dress," read the caption. When I confronted Walter with the post, his guilty expression told me everything. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew she bought another dress." He sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "She asked me not to tell you. Said she didn't want to hurt your feelings after you'd worked so hard. So you helped her lie to me. For how long, Walter?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "She came to me about 2 months ago, said she was worried your dress wouldn't be sophisticated enough for the venue. Asked if I could help with the cost of a backup. I thought she might wear your dress for the ceremony and the designer one for the reception." "Did you see the credit card statement? How much did it cost?" My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Walter named a sum that made me gasp. More than 3 months of his teacher's salary. "Does she have any idea what that kind of money means to us? To our retirement?" "I wanted her to have her dream wedding," Walter said weakly. "No," I corrected him. "You wanted to rescue her from having to wear something her old mother made. You were embarrassed too." His silence confirmed my accusation. The worst discovery came later that day, when Lillian's maid of honor accidentally tagged me in a photo from 6 weeks earlier. It showed the bridal party at lunch, with Lillian holding up a sketch of my dress, clearly in the middle of saying something that had everyone laughing. The casual cruelty of it, the weeks of mocking, while I worked through pain, to create something special for her, broke something in me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. As the wedding day approached, I faced an impossible decision. Should I attend, swallow my hurt, and pretend I hadn't discovered the extent of Lillian's deception, or should I stay home, potentially creating a family rift that might never heal? "You have to go," Walter insisted. "She's still our daughter. People make mistakes." This wasn't a mistake, I countered. This was months of deliberate deception and mockery. My phone buzzed with a text from Lillian. "You're still coming tomorrow, right? Just leave the dress at home." No apology. No acknowledgement of the hurt she'd caused. Just a casual reminder not to embarrass her with my handmade creation. I didn't respond. The wedding was set for 4 o'clock. By noon the next day, I still hadn't decided whether to attend. I sat in my workshop surrounded by the tools of my craft, running my swollen fingers over scraps of the beautiful silk I'd used for Lillian's dress. I remembered her as a little girl watching me sew with such admiration in her eyes. When had that changed? When had my talent become something embarrassing to her? I looked at family photos on the wall. Lillian's 5th birthday, when I'd made her a princess costume that she refused to take off for 3 days. Her high school graduation, where she'd hugged me so tightly and whispered, "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom." The Christmas when she was 24 and gave me a new sewing machine with a card that read, "For the woman who taught me that creating beautiful things is the highest form of love." The disconnect between that daughter and the woman who had laughed about my work with her friends was so stark that it felt like mourning. I was losing the daughter I thought I had, and I didn't know how to process that grief. After weeks of pretending to be fine, of telling friends and family that I was excited for the wedding, of lying to protect Lillian's reputation even as she damaged mine, something in me finally broke. I collapsed in my workshop, sobbing until I could barely breathe. Walter found me there, curled on the floor among scraps of wedding dress fabric. "I can't do this anymore," I told him through tears. "I can't pretend this doesn't hurt." Walter knelt beside me, his own eyes wet. "I'm so sorry, Carmel. I should have told you the truth. I should have stood up for you." My health, already compromised by the months of overwork on the dress, deteriorated further. I developed insomnia, lost weight, and the arthritis in my hands flared so severely that I could barely hold a cup of tea. Walter watched me with growing concern, his teacher's salary stretched between medical appointments for me and payments for Lillian's designer dress. All the while, Lillian continued with her wedding preparations as if nothing had happened. Her occasional texts were about seating arrangements and flower deliveries, never acknowledging the elephant in the room. She had moved on while I remained trapped in the moment of hearing her laugh about my work with her friends. Despite everything, I found myself getting ready for the wedding on that Saturday afternoon. Walter's relief was palpable as he knotted his tie. "I'm glad you're coming," he said softly. "No matter what's happened, she's still our Lillian." I wasn't so sure about that anymore, but I nodded and applied another layer of makeup to hide the dark circles under my eyes. The mother of the bride should look happy and proud, not heartbroken and betrayed. We arrived at the elegant country club venue an hour before the ceremony. The place was a flurry of activity, with florists arranging last-minute bouquets and ushers practicing their coordinated movements. Everything was elegant, expensive, and perfectly matched to the sophisticated tastes of James's family. The first person I saw was James's mother, Catherine, a tall woman with perfectly highlighted hair and the kind of posture that spoke of childhood deportment lessons. She kissed me on both cheeks. "Carmel, darling, you look comfortable." Her eyes flicked dismissively over my simple blue dress before moving on to greet someone more important. Walter squeezed my hand. "Ignore her. Let's go find Lillian." We were directed to a luxurious bridal suite where Lillian was getting ready with her bridesmaids. When we entered, she was standing in the center of the room in her designer gown, while a photographer captured the getting ready moments that had clearly been carefully staged. The real preparation had happened hours ago. The dress was beautiful, I had to admit. Clean lines, exquisite fabric, the kind of simplicity that only comes with a 5-figure price tag. It suited her perfectly, and for a moment I wondered if I had been wrong to think my creation could compete with professional designers. "Mom, Dad, Lillian," exclaimed, her voice overly bright. She embraced Walter warmly, then gave me a more restrained hug, careful not to wrinkle her gown or disturb her professionally applied makeup. "You look beautiful," I said, because it was true, and because it was what mothers say at weddings. "Doesn't she?" one of the bridesmaids gushed. I recognized her voice as one who had been in the room during my humiliation. She couldn't quite meet my eyes. We made awkward small talk for a few minutes. I complimented the flowers. Walter joked nervously about walking Lillian down the aisle without tripping, and everyone pretended that everything was normal. Then the wedding planner announced it was time for the mother of the bride to be escorted to her seat. "I'll see you out there," I told Lillian, managing a smile that felt foreign on my face. As I turned to leave, I heard her say to her maid of honor, "Make sure the photographer gets a good shot of the back of the dress when I'm walking down the aisle." Walter and I were barely out of the bridal suite when we heard the scream. It was followed by a string of expletives that I had never heard from my daughter's mouth. We rushed back in to find Lillian staring in horror at a massive red wine stain spreading across the front of her perfect white designer dress. One of the bridesmaids stood frozen, an empty wine glass in her hand, her face a mask of terror. "I'm so sorry," she gasped. "Someone bumped my elbow and The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Lillian shrieked. "What am I going to do?" The wedding planner materialized her professional calm, cracking slightly at the edges. "Let me see," she said, examining the stain. "This is significant. I'm not sure we can clean this in time. Can we cover it?" Somehow the maid of honor suggested desperately. The wedding planner shook her head. "The stain is too central, and this fabric shows everything. Perhaps we could delay the ceremony." "The minister has another wedding at 6, Lillian wailed, "and James's grandparents have their flight home tonight." Chaos erupted in the bridal suite. Bridesmaids frantically called nearby bridal shops. The wedding planner consulted with the hotel staff about stain removal options. Lillian alternated between hysterical crying and angry outbursts. Through it all, I stood silently by the door, watching my daughter's perfect day crumble over a glass of spilled wine. "The nearest bridal shop is 30 minutes away," a bridesmaid reported, "and they don't have anything in her size ready to go." "What about a bridesmaid dress?" the wedding planner suggested. "Perhaps in white or cream." "They're all navy blue," Lillian cried, mascara tracking down her cheeks. "I can't get married in navy blue." Walter, who had been watching the scene unfold with increasing concern, suddenly caught my eye. A silent communication passed between us, the kind that only happens after decades of marriage. He slipped out of the room without a word. 5 minutes later, as the wedding planner was regretfully informing the increasingly distraught bride that they might need to postpone the ceremony, Walter returned. He pulled me into the hallway. "The dress is in the car," he said quietly. "I brought it just in case." I stared at him. "You brought the dress I made. Why would you do that?" "Because I know you," he said simply. "And deep down you still love her, no matter how much she hurt you." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the decision before me. I could walk away, let Lillian face the consequences of her actions. Or I could offer her the very dress she had mocked and rejected, saving her wedding day, but risking further humiliation if she refused. "I'll get it," I finally said. When I returned to the bridal suite carrying the familiar garment bag, the room fell silent. Lillian stared at me, her tear-stained face showing a complex mixture of emotions. "Is that—" She couldn't finish the question. I unzipped the bag and revealed the dress I had poured my heart into creating. "It's your choice, Lillian." "You brought it," she whispered. "After everything I said, you still brought it." "I'm your mother," I said simply. The bridesmaids and wedding planner tactfully stepped out, leaving us alone together. Lillian looked at the handmade gown, then down at her ruined designer dress. "I don't deserve your help," she said, her voice small. "No," I agreed, "you don't." Her face crumpled again, but this time with genuine remorse rather than self-pity. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I've been horrible to you. The things I said about your dress, I didn't mean them. I was just trying to impress those people. They're not even really my friends." "Then why?" I asked, needing to understand. Lillian sank into a chair, careful of her stained gown. "James's family has all this money and class." I felt so inadequate, like they could tell I didn't belong in their world. When his cousin got engaged and had a Dior wedding dress, everyone made such a fuss. I thought if I had a designer dress too, they might accept me. "So you let me work for 6 months on a dress you never intended to wear?" She couldn't look at me. "I convinced myself you'd understand once you saw how beautiful the designer dress was, that you'd agree it was better for the wedding. I know how stupid that sounds now." It was the first honest thing she'd said to me in months. Those horrible things I said to my bridesmaids. I was showing off, trying to sound sophisticated by putting down the homemade dress. The truth is, I was scared. Of what? That I wouldn't be good enough for James's family no matter what I wore. That they'd always see me as the daughter of a high school teacher and a seamstress. I wanted to be angry to hold on to my hurt, but seeing my daughter so vulnerable broke through my defenses. "And does James make you feel this way? Like you're not good enough?" "No," she said immediately. "Never. He loves me for me. He doesn't care about any of this fancy stuff. It was all my own insecurity." And now I asked, gesturing to the stained designer gown. Lillian looked at the handmade dress I still held. "Now I'm wondering if this is karma, and hoping my mother loves me enough to help me even though I don't deserve it." I hung the dress on a nearby hook. "Let's get you out of that ruined dress, and see if this one still fits." As I helped Lillian out of the wine-soaked designer gown, I noticed that the fit wasn't quite right. The bodice gaped slightly at the sides, and the hem had been hastily adjusted. "Rush alterations," Lillian admitted sheepishly. "There wasn't time for a proper fitting." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. After canceling multiple fittings for the dress I'd made, she'd ended up with a designer gown that didn't fit correctly. I helped her into my creation, the dress I knew would fit her perfectly because I had memorized every curve of her body since she was born. The silk slipped over her head, cascading down like water, settling exactly where it should against her hips and waist. "It's a little snug," Lillian said, sucking in her stomach. "I've gained a few pounds from stress eating this week." "Stand still," I instructed, professional mode taking over. I found my emergency sewing kit in my purse and began making quick, precise adjustments. My arthritic fingers protested, but I ignored the pain, focused on the task at hand. As I worked, Lillian watched me in the mirror. "I can't believe you're helping me after what I did." "I'm not doing it for you," I said, pins between my lips. "I'm doing it for your father who loves you unconditionally, and for myself because I finish what I start." She nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Mom, there's something else I need to tell you. Something important." I continued working, not trusting myself to speak. "The real reason I was so desperate to fit in with James's crowd is his parents have been terrible to me. Not James, never James, but his mother especially. She told him I wasn't their kind of people, that my background wasn't suitable." My hands stilled. "She said that to your face?" "No, he told me about it. We had a huge fight. He almost called off the relationship because of how they treated me. That's when I started trying to change everything about myself. My clothes, my accent, even the way I talked about you and Dad." I resumed my alterations, digesting this new information. "And James, how does he feel about all this pretense?" "He hates it," she admitted. "He's been telling me for months to just be myself. That his parents will either accept me or not, but that I can't live my life trying to please them." "Smart man," I murmured, securing a final stitch. "The worst part is, I started believing it. That I needed to erase where I came from to deserve him. That being the daughter of a seamstress was something to be ashamed of." I stood up, my knees cracking in protest, and turned her to face me. "Look at me, Lillian. Are you marrying James or his family?" "James, of course." "Then stop trying to be someone you're not, for people who haven't earned that kind of power over you." She nodded, tears threatening her freshly applied makeup. "I'm so sorry, Mom." "Don't cry," I said practically. "There's no time to redo your makeup. The ceremony starts in 7 minutes." I stepped back to assess the dress. It fit her perfectly now, the silk skimming her body, as if it had been poured on the beadwork, catching the light with every breath she took. The handmade lace at the hem and train created the illusion that she was walking through a garden of delicate flowers. "It's beautiful," she whispered, turning to see the back. "It's the most beautiful dress I've ever seen." There was no time for further conversation. The bridesmaids and wedding planner returned, gasping in admiration at the transformation. The wedding planner quickly rearranged the bouquet to complement the dress's style, and the photographer snapped candid photos of the final preparations. "It's time," the wedding planner announced. "Everyone to their positions." I slipped out to take my place in the front row next to the space Walter would occupy after walking Lillian down the aisle. As I settled into my seat, Catherine Harrington leaned over from the opposite side of the aisle. "I heard there was some emergency with the dress," she said, her voice dripping with barely concealed satisfaction. "I do hope everything is adequate." I smiled serenely. "Everything is perfect, thank you." The music started, and the processional began. When Lillian appeared at the end of the aisle on Walter's arm, there was an audible gasp from the assembled guests. She was radiant, and the dress moved with her like a living thing, the train spreading behind her in a cascade of handcrafted lace. James, waiting at the altar, broke protocol by stepping forward, his face alight with love and admiration. "You're stunning," he said loud enough for the front rows to hear. As Walter placed Lillian's hand in James's, he whispered something that made the groom nod solemnly. Then my husband took his place beside me, squeezing my hand in silent support. Throughout the ceremony, I noticed the photographer focusing not just on the couple, but on the details of the dress, the beadwork, the lace appliques, the way the silk caught the light when Lillian moved. And I noticed Catherine Harrington's expression shift, from condescension to reluctant admiration as she studied the gown. At the reception, as Lillian and James circulated among their guests, I overheard countless compliments about the dress. "Who's the designer?" a well-dressed woman asked Lillian. "It's exquisite work." Instead of demurring or changing the subject, Lillian beamed with pride. "My mother made it. She was a professional seamstress for 40 years. The woman turned to me with new respect. "You created this. It's museum-quality work. Are you still taking commissions?" Before I could answer, Catherine Harrington appeared at my elbow. "I must admit, Carmel, I misjudged you. When James told us Lillian's mother was a seamstress, I pictured, well, something quite different. This dress could be on a Paris runway." "Thank you," I said simply, neither accepting nor rejecting her backhanded compliment. As the evening progressed, more guests approached me about the dress. A fashion journalist wanted to feature it in a wedding magazine spread. 2 mothers with daughters approaching engagement asked for my contact information. Even the wedding planner pulled me aside to discuss potential collaborations. But the most significant moment came when the wedding photographer asked for special shots of just the dress details. "I've never seen workmanship like this," he said carefully, arranging the train to capture the lace pattern. "This should be documented properly." Throughout it all, I watched Lillian transform. The affected mannerisms she'd adopted around James's family fell away. Her real laugh returned, the one that came from deep in her belly and had always been contagious. She stopped checking her appearance in every reflective surface and instead focused on enjoying her wedding day. During the father-daughter dance, Walter whispered something in her ear that made her seek me out with her eyes. When the dance ended, she walked directly to me and pulled me onto the dance floor. "I don't think there's a mother-daughter dance on the schedule," I said, surprised. "I'm the bride. I make the schedule," she replied, with the confidence of the Lillian I used to know. As we swayed to the music, she said quietly, "Thank you for saving me today. Not just the wedding, but me. I was losing myself, and you brought me back." It wasn't a complete healing of the hurt she'd caused, but it was a beginning, a first small stitch in the repair of our torn relationship. The morning after the wedding, before Lillian and James left for their honeymoon in Bali, she asked to meet me for breakfast in the hotel restaurant. I arrived to find her already waiting, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, looking more like my daughter than the stranger she'd become in recent months. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said as I sat down. "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. A server poured coffee, and we both busied ourselves with cream and sugar, using the familiar ritual to postpone the difficult conversation ahead. Finally, Lillian looked up. "I need to apologize properly. No excuses, no explanations. What I did was cruel and ungrateful. I hurt you deliberately repeatedly when all you were doing was creating something beautiful for me. I'm deeply sorry, Mom. The simple, direct apology caught me off guard. I had expected more justifications, more attempts to explain away her behavior. The straightforward acknowledgement of wrongdoing was disarming. I appreciate that, I said carefully. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, she continued. Maybe not ever fully, but I want you to know that I understand what I did. The dress you made is the most precious gift I've ever received. Not just because it's beautiful, but because of the love that went into every stitch. I took a sip of coffee, buying time to steady my voice. I spent 6 months making that dress, Lillian. 6 months of physical pain because I wanted to give you something special. Finding out you were mocking it behind my back, planning to hide it away unworn, it broke my heart. She reached across the table for my hand, her fingers gently touching my swollen knuckles. I know, and there's nothing I can say to make that right. All I can do is try to be better going forward. It wasn't enough to erase the hurt, but it was honest. And honesty was what we needed to rebuild anything between us. I need time, I told her. I'll always love you because you're my daughter, but trusting you again, that will take time. She nodded, accepting this boundary. I understand, and I'll wait however long it takes. 2 weeks later, while Lillian and James were still on their honeymoon, something unexpected happened. The wedding photographer posted a few preview images online, including detailed shots of the dress. Within days, the photos had gone viral in the wedding, and fashion communities shared thousands of times with comments praising the intricate handwork and timeless design. By the time Lillian returned from Bali, my email inbox was flooded with inquiries. Women from across the country, and even a few from overseas, wanted to know if I would create custom dresses for them. A bridal magazine wanted to do a feature story. A luxury department store offered me a contract to design a small collection. You're famous, Mom Lillian exclaimed when she visited, after returning from her honeymoon. Are you going to accept any of these offers? I hadn't decided. My arthritis made large-scale production impossible, and retirement had been a relief after decades of working with demanding clients. But the unexpected validation was healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. I'm thinking about it, I admitted. Maybe a very limited number of special commissions, if my hands can handle it. Lillian looked thoughtful. What if you had helped someone to do the heavy work while you designed and supervised the fine details? Are you volunteering? I asked skeptically. Actually, yes. She looked nervous but determined. I'm good with computers. I could handle the business side, the website client communications. And maybe you could teach me to sew again. Not at your level, but enough to help. The offer surprised me. What about your marketing job? I've been thinking about making a change anyway. This could be a new chapter for both of us. It was tempting to reject the idea outright to protect myself from further disappointment, but there was something in her expression, a genuine vulnerability and hope that made me pause. Let me think about it, I said. Over the next few weeks, as I cautiously accepted a few commissions for special occasion dresses, Lillian proved her commitment. She visited regularly, first helping with administrative tasks, then gradually expressing interest in the creative process. I began teaching her basic techniques again, starting with simple stitches and advancing to more complex work as her skills improved. Walter watched our tentative reconciliation with relief and support, never pushing but always encouraging. She's trying caramel, he reminded me when I expressed doubts. People can change when they recognize their mistakes. Slowly, a new business took shape. Whitney and Daughter Bespoke Creations started with wedding and special occasion dresses, but soon expanded to include heirloom-quality christening gowns and custom memory quilts made from cherished clothing. Our waiting list grew, allowing us to be selective about the projects we accepted. Working together wasn't always smooth. We had disagreements about designs, pricing, and time management. But these were normal conflicts, professional differences, rather than the personal betrayal that had damaged our relationship. Each resolved disagreement became another small step in rebuilding trust. The most difficult conversations happened during our weekly coffee meetings, which became a ritual for addressing personal matters outside of work hours. I'm seeing a therapist, Lillian confessed during one of these sessions, about 3 months into our new business venture. I needed to understand why I was so willing to hurt you to impress people who didn't matter. And what have you learned? I asked, genuinely curious. That I've spent my whole life feeling like I had to prove I was special. Being the daughter of a seamstress and a teacher felt ordinary. I wanted to be extraordinary, and I thought marrying into money would do that. But all it did was make me ashamed of the best parts of myself. I considered this. There's nothing wrong with wanting more than what you grew up with. Your father and I always encouraged you to reach higher. But not by stepping on the people who love me to get there, she said firmly. That's the difference I didn't understand. These honest conversations were painful but necessary. Layer by layer, we examined the patterns that had led to our estrangement and worked to establish healthier ones. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments when a careless word would reopen old wounds, but we were moving forward. A year after the wedding, James and Lillian decided to renew their vows in a small, intimate ceremony at our home. This time, Lillian proudly wore the original dress I had made, properly photographed and appreciated by the small circle of people who truly mattered to them. No wine allowed near the bride, James joked as he raised his glass in a toast. But beneath the humor was a recognition of how a disaster had ultimately led to healing. The photos from this simple ceremony showing the dress in all its detailed glory were added to our business portfolio, becoming our most requested style for brides, seeking something unique and meaningful. 5 years have passed since that wedding day when a spilled glass of wine changed the course of our family. So much has happened in those years that sometimes it feels like another lifetime. Whitney and Daughter has grown from a small home-based operation to a respected atelier with a 6-month waiting list. We employ 3 assistants, now all trained in traditional handwork techniques that are becoming increasingly rare in today's fast fashion world. My role has shifted to design and final inspections, protecting my arthritic hands while still maintaining our quality standards. Lillian has become a skilled seamstress in her own right, developing a style that honors the techniques I taught her while incorporating contemporary elements that appeal to younger clients. Our collaboration has produced work neither of us could have created alone. But the most significant development came 2 years ago, when Lillian gave birth to a daughter, Emma. The moment I held my granddaughter wrapped in a christening gown I had created from silk, left over from Lillian's wedding dress, I felt a circle completing. The look in Lillian's eyes as she watched me with her daughter held none of the shame or embarrassment that had once infected our relationship. I want her to know where she comes from, Lillian told me, to be proud of her grandmother who creates beautiful things with her hands, to understand that real value isn't about price tags or status. The wedding dress that was nearly discarded now hangs in a special preservation case in our studio, not as a relic but as a living piece of our story. Clients often ask about it, and Lillian never hesitates to share the truth. It's the dress that saved my wedding, and my relationship with my mother, she tells them. It taught me what really matters. The healing journey hasn't always been easy. Forgiveness didn't happen in a single moment of revelation, but in thousands of small choices to move forward rather than dwell in hurt. There were days when remembering the pain was overwhelming, when I questioned whether reconciliation was truly possible. But gradually, the sharp edges of betrayal dulled, replaced by new memories of shared accomplishments and honest connection. Trust, once broken, requires more than apologies to rebuild. It demands consistent action, transparency, and the courage to be vulnerable again. Lillian demonstrated her commitment to change, not through grand gestures, but through daily choices, to be honest, even when the truth was uncomfortable. I, too, had to change. I had to examine my own role in our damaged relationship, my tendency to define my worth through my children's approval, my reluctance to set clear boundaries. I learned that loving unconditionally doesn't mean accepting mistreatment, that standing up for my worth strengthened rather than threatened our family bonds. We've both transformed through this experience. I've grown from a hurt mother hiding in her workshop to a confident businesswoman sharing my craft with a new generation. Lillian has evolved from someone desperate for external validation to a woman comfortable in her authentic self, no longer hiding her background but celebrating it. The dress that was once mocked now hangs in our studio as a reminder that true value exists beyond social acceptance or status. It represents the courage required to forgive without becoming a doormat to hold people accountable, while still offering them a path to redemption. Most importantly, it symbolizes the peace that comes from maintaining boundaries with love, from being true to yourself even when others demand conformity. Sometimes our greatest pain leads to unexpected joy. Had Lillian worn her designer dress without incident, our relationship might have continued its slow deterioration, the distance between us growing until reconciliation became impossible. That glass of spilled wine created a crisis that forced us to confront hard truths and make difficult choices. From that messy, painful moment grew a stronger bond than we had before. What about your family relationships? Have you ever experienced a painful moment that ultimately led to healing? Or are you currently navigating a difficult situation with someone you love? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes sharing our experiences helps others find their way forward. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more reflections on family forgiveness and finding peace after pain. Thank you for listening to my journey, and may you find the courage to mend what's broken in your own life.